Today is Friday, September 13th, 2024, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. I'm here again with my podcast partner and co-host, Mr. Wallace Smith. Mr. Smith, how are you doing this morning?
I am doing wonderfully. Thank you, Mr. Robinson. It's wonderfully busy. Good to be blessed with work, and very blessed with our guest today, who we have.
Yes, we're not even going to pretend. We're excited about our guest, and we'll just launch right into it. Who do we have today, Mr. Smith?
Something tells me most of our people will know who it is the moment he says hello. Would you please say hello to all of our listeners?
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Perfect. That's right. It's actually one of Mr. Robinson's daughters has come to, and I'm just kidding. That clearly was a very masculine voice. As Mr. Mario Hernandez. So right after the music, we'll be back with a discussion with Mr. Mario Hernandez. Thank you, Jake and Julia. And welcome, everyone, again to the Living Youth Podcast. And let me say, Mr. Robinson can confirm this. I at least have one witness. I don't have two or three. But Mr. Hernandez, we have wanted you to be able to stop by for a long time. I would say, it was one of the first things we talked about. But we just weren't diligent enough to go down and ask. And today, Mr. Robinson said, how about today's the day? And he went and asked, and you're so willing. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez, for doing this. We really appreciate it.
I'm very happy to be here with you.
Well, good. Let's see. We've assured him that it's not a video. There's no video cameras here. So, but if there were, you'd notice he was the sharpest looking of the three of us. He's come clearly ready to work.
And you and I have to get really close to our microphones, and Mr. Hernandez doesn't have to get very close.
That's right. He's got his good voice. So we mainly, as I mentioned before the podcast, which I'll mention, maybe we have some new listeners who don't realize this. We do like to have various ministers on. If you go back and look at this is episode 116, I think. Mm-hmm. We've had Mr. Nathan in, we've had Mr. Wahavich, we've had a variety of folks. Yeah, that's right. Mr. Senna not too long ago, but we've had people in to just kind of talk about their background to give you an opportunity, our teens and young adults, to better know some of the individuals you're hearing sermons from and reading articles by and all of that work. And so we've long wanted Mr. Hernandez to come. And so Mr. Hernandez, we want you to feel free to go in, whatever particular directions you'd like, but maybe I can start by asking how you came into the church and God's truth. And I'm sure there's going to have some backstories to that, but I'm sure they would appreciate knowing.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure for me to talk to the youth. I say hello to all of you. And this question has been the center of my life. How did I come to the church? It was a search, something in me since my youth, even childhood, wanted to know what's the purpose of life? A question that not many people ask because they are too busy in this world trying to survive or too distracted, like it happens in our days more than ever before because of the internet. They don't have time to ask those questions. I was born in Colombia, South America, and I was blessed. I grew up close to nature. The hometown where I grew up is called Manizales in Colombia. Is in the center range of the Andes, so we're surrounded by mountains and very fertile land. Even in altitude, cattle could eat good grass, fresh grass, and I was close to nature because the back of our home, there were woods and there were pastures. In the front was the main street in town. So I had the two worlds in one. And I spent a lot of time in the woods with my brothers and also by myself. And since childhood, I start kind of perceiving the presence of the Creator in His creation. I was in love with nature, with the trees and the mountains and the creeks and all of that, and it certainly had a profound influence in me. But then, since I was a youngster, I grew up in a Catholic country, in a Catholic family, but there was something in me that was not satisfied. I said, what is the reason for us being here? And I asked those questions since early life. And when I was a teenager, I had this tremendous desire to go to Europe and know the world, especially Europe. I was fascinated by Europe. And in those days, French was an obligatory assignment in school. And I managed to be the best student in French in my class. And when I turned 17, I wanted to go, and my mother said, no, you finish your high school and learn well French, and I let you go. I don't want to frustrate your dreams. I don't want you to say when you're later in life, my mom didn't let me, because she was a widow, she didn't let me fulfill my dreams. And she said, bring me your high school diploma and I will let you go. So when I was 8, I finished my high school at 17, and I continued to study French in a special institution there that the French government had. They didn't want to lose ground to the English. So when a country had French as an obligatory assignment, we were well received in France, like as if we were French. So we had many advantages. So at 18, I was already fluent in French. I already have read some books in French, and I was familiar with the culture. And then I went to France. And I went to study philosophy precisely because I wanted to know why in the world are we here. Maybe the philosophers know it. But I tell you, after 4 years, I was very disappointed, because one says one thing, then the other one says something else, and each one creates a theory and becomes kind of a fashion for a certain period of time, and after it disappears from the scene and someone else comes up with another theory. And after that time, I said, no, this is not the way to go. At that time but I had a tremendous blessing of having many friends from the French culture, because I was fluent in French already, and God opened the door for me to be in the company of people of the place. And that opened, doors for culture and for understanding different culture, which I appreciated very much. And so I did those studies, and I finished, and I said, I have enough of this. I have to look for something else that is my question that has been not answered. So I went, I was dreaming of, and I was able to travel all over Europe. My brother came to join me in those days when the Iron Curtain was the border of the Soviet Union. It was very difficult to enter there. It was kind of a secretive region of the world. And because we were from the third world, we arrived at the border there, and they sent us to an embassy in Finland and said, if you get your visa, we'll let you come in. So we got visas, and we were able to drive in a little bug, a Volkswagen bug, to, in those days, Leningrad, who is now St. Petersburg, and then Moscow. And why? We were absolutely fascinated. It was the anniversary of the revolution, of the Bolshevik Revolution, who was the communist revolution, and we saw many dances and songs and wonderful shows. It's fascinating culture. So it was an enriching of our horizons, again, to go and visit those areas. And when I finished my studies in France, I wanted to know and go to Canada. I was fascinated by the great spaces of Canada, the woods and the lakes, nature, because, like I told you, I grew up close to nature, and I was a scout in my youth, and I remember seeing the books of the scouts in Canada, and I saw those canoes and those lakes, and I said, boy, I want to go there. I would like to go to places that probably had not been untouched, probably by civilization. I had lived enough in the heart of civilization, European civilization. I appreciated it, but I wanted to get away from it. And I had a friend who was doing a doctorate degree in philosophy. We became friends in Strasbourg, the city where I was living in France. And the night before he left, I have never mentioned this to him, but I said, his name was Viateur. He said, Viateur, you are going back to Canada, to Quebec. You know, my dream from my youth has been to be a forest ranger in Canada. And he said to me, I asked him, can you find me a job there as a forest ranger, or they call it also firekeeper because it's just for the summertime. And he said, are you serious? I said, yes, I am dead serious. He said, well, my brother is General Director of Lands and Forests of Quebec. I said, wow. That was the night before he left. So his brother sent me an application. I filled it up enthusiastically. And sure enough, she notified me, come up, we have a job for you.
Wow.
Wow, that was a tremendous surprise for me and the fulfillment of a dream. So I didn't take any books of philosophy with me. I took the 4 Gospels that I was given when I did my first communion as a Catholic, and I always kept in my pocket. And it kept me out of trouble because I became familiar with Jesus Christ. I was just a Catholic young guy looking for some reason of my existence in this world. And I would read, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And I finish, I start again. And I always kept it in my pocket. It was a gift that was given to me by my teacher when I did my first communion. And that kept me out of trouble, I tell you. In all these trips and in all these adventures, I was often reading those Gospels. And I tell you one thing, I became fascinated with Jesus Christ that very few people know. There is a book there, I think, that says the man nobody knows, and it's actually the Jesus of the Bible. But I was familiar with it, and then I was taken to a tower in the midst of the forests of northern Canada, and I need to climb that tower. I tell you, you had your butterflies in your belly because it was on the top of a mountain, and then this tower was very, very high, and there was a little cabin on top, and I have visibility probably for 100 miles around there. And I was about 100 miles from the nearest human being. They took me there in a helicopter and told me, okay, you have to stay there, but let us know whenever you want to come back, because we don't think you are going to enjoy that experience. But they didn't know. I was used to be around in nature and appreciate, like I said to you, like the presence of the Creator. And for me, it was a tremendous opportunity. And I was so happy. There was a little cabin, and then I had to go and climb that tower 8 hours a day to look at the horizon with binoculars to check for fires. There was no fire that summer, thankfully, but it was a tremendous experience for me because I had a teacher when I was in France, the only one who really impressed me. He was a man who had been a prisoner of the Germans during the war, and he had suffered famine, and they didn't kill him because he was not a Jew, but the Germans respect intellectuals, and they gave him access to a library, and so I became friends with him. I was fascinated with his stories. I can give you a lot of stories that he told us with very famous people, among them Dr. Albert Schweitzer, he won the Nobel Prize of Peace, and he studied medicine, knowing that there were little children in Africa, in the country of Gabon specifically, dying of things that were easily treated. He became a doctor, and he was a wonderful musician, and he gave concerts around the world, and he gathered funds for his hospital in the jungle in the country of Gabon in Africa. So he told us many stories. I was fascinated. And one day when I went to visit him, this professor of mine, his name was André Canives, when I came into his office there in his apartment in Strasbourg, where I was living, he asked me, Mario, do you fast? I said, no, sir. How do you fast? And he explained to me, we just don't eat. Okay, well, how long? He said, well, you can start with 1 day and probably go to 2 or 3 days. He said, wow. And he said, it's good for you. I was subject to a famine when I was a prisoner of the Germans, and I realized when they let me have access to a library that my mind was very clear, and I could think more profoundly because I was fasting by force. There was no food. And so when I was in that forest, my friends, in Canada, far away from everybody, I was just alone there, And thank God I wasn't bored for a minute, because I have a reason to be there. That was probably my opportunity to spend time in reflection and meditation and why in the world, what's the meaning of life, like the booklet we have. And so it was a fascinating experience in a solitude. They called me after 2 weeks and said, Mario, do we send a helicopter to pick you up? And said, yeah, bring me food for 1 year. So they all laughed there at the center of control of this system of surveillance of the woods so they don't all burn in the summertime. So anyway, it was a tremendous experience, and I started to fast there in that mountain. Just by myself, I don't have anything to do. Just climb up there, and I was reading. Somebody left a Bible there, and I was reading the Bible and reading the 4 Gospels in Spanish, and I was fascinated, having all the time I wanted, and then I would fast every week. As my professor taught me, 1 week I would fast 36 hours, the next week I would fast 48 hours, and I went on and on the whole summer, reading the Gospels, reading the New Testament, and fasting, and enjoying the nature and the peace of the place. And when I came out of there, my friends, at the end of the summer, I felt like I was walking on the air. It was a tremendous feeling. And the best of all, I had a certainty that God was going to show me where his true church was. Because after reading the Bible and the Gospels intensely, you come to the conclusion that the church where I grew up was not the church of God.
Wow.
So I had that inside me. It said, God is going to show me where his true church is. I didn't know when or how, but I have that conviction. So after finishing there, I tell you this, I went back to Europe because my mother, like I said, who was a widow, she was in Rome, and there were some of the priests that had been my teachers. They were doing doctorate degrees in history of the church, Catholic Church, and other subjects. And they knew me because I had been their pupil. And they asked me, Mario, you have a great future. If you want, we can set for you a private meeting with the Pope. Just you and the Pope alone. And after spending that summer there and reading and being more aware of what did Christ found, what type of church he found, I said, this is not the church Christ founded. And I refused. And they were very astonished because there was already clear convictions in my head. So I returned to Colombia, my friends, and I started teaching at the university French and philosophy. And I tell you, I was frustrated because I didn't believe in philosophy anymore, but it's the only thing I knew how to do. So I was looking forward to get out of there and do something else. And what happened is, one day, coming out of the university, I think it was a Friday, like today, I was tired, and I saw a friend of mine in the street that had a coffee tree plantation. And I say, hey, Guillermo, can I spend the weekend in your farm? And he said, sure, go, they would take care. The caretakers would cook for you, and they have the key of my little place there. You can spend the time there. So I went there. By the way, you have to go to that farm by foot because there was no road that would get there. And I love that because I love what is more intact, not so civilized. So I went there, and it was dark inside, of course. The windows were closed, and I opened the windows, and boy, the scenery of the coffee tree plantations and the mountains and the hills was fascinated. I was looking at that, and then when I lowered my eyes, I saw in a table there a magazine called La Pura Verdad, which is the plain truth in Spanish. And I said, wow, what a pretentious title for a magazine. But you know what? I was curious. Then I sat down. It was a desk there in front of the window with the open spaces there. And I started reading that. And like I tell you, I was looking for what's the meaning of life? And I started studying that, reading that magazine. I devoured the magazine. I said, where do these people have this wisdom? I have not heard reasoning so sound and so realistic that gives you something concrete to think about and that inspires you to do something about it too. Because, philosophers, they can spend, writing books, dozen books, and they don't tell you how to live. And there was something here that was a wisdom about the meaning of life, and there were practical reasons to apply in your life. And I said, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And then I read the whole magazine. My friend was a subscriber to that magazine. And, he never in his life found out there was a church behind it. But when I saw there was a coupon there, it said free subscription. I was more impressed. And then, wow, these people don't charge for the subscription. So I cut the little piece and I became a subscriber. And then that's the beginning of the story, my friends. And here I am because of that. Sometimes when I wake up and I thank God for Mr. Armstrong, I thank God for the Church of God. If that magazine had not been published, in those days we didn't have a television program or things like that. And in those countries, it was more limited. And if that magazine had not been someone who took the initiative to start spreading the truth of the meaning of life, and they translated that magazine into Spanish, and I found it in a coffee tree plantation in the mountains in Colombia. And God fulfilled that conviction I had when I finished my stay in the woods in Canada, that he would show me where his true church was. But at the beginning, it was not obvious that in the magazine they kind of hid that there was a church behind it. It was after 2 years of receiving the magazine, and then I was doing the Bible course already, when they presented a picture in the middle of the magazine with a picture of the auditorium and the onyx wall there with golden letters written, made possible by the gifts of the members of the Worldwide Church of God. I said, wow, this is a church. And this is a church. This is the true church. And the next great blessing I had was that I had the possibility to come to Ambassador College. And that's probably the happiest day in my life, when I received the envelope, you're being accepted. And it was exactly the fall of 1979, after Mr. Armstrong had closed the college because the church had deviated from the truth. And it took him 7 years to put the church back on track, and then God let him go to sleep. And it was the fall of 1979 when the church reopened the 4-year program Mr. Armstrong did. And I already was fluent in English too, because I started to read the magazine and the publications in English, so I would learn the language. So when I came to Ambassador, I could understand the classes. And it was a tremendous blessing too. So it was the adventure of my life, was the search of the truth. And then to be able to go to Ambassador College, so different from the universities of this world, where I have studied in France and when I taught in Colombia, where there was graffiti in the walls, the chairs were all messed up, and this was order, this was cleanliness, this was beauty. That, the most beautiful campus in the United States, and I'm quite sure in the whole world. And it was a paradise. And I came in there and I said to the young men like you, whom I love, and I had a wonderful relationship with them, do you realize what you have? I told them my story. Said, mine was a long search and a long expectation for God to show me where his true church was. And you have grown up in it, and you have received this from birth, almost from birth. I tell you, my friends, please, don't wait for something that's going to happen and that we know is coming, to wake up and to really appreciate what you have. It's a treasure that you cannot You cannot describe the tremendous blessing of knowing the truth and the reason and the meaning of life. So I encourage you, my friends, to really have this passion for God. God walked in this passion in me for Jesus Christ. And then after, of course, when I started reading the Psalms, I saw that in King David, and it was so inspiring. So I encourage you, even if you know the end comes and some of you are still teenagers and you are not baptized or something, if you do what God expects from you to do, if you turn your hearts to the example of your parents and the parents turn their hearts to you, God is going to protect you from the great tribulation. And you enter the millennium and you will be able to get married and live in a paradise. Christ is going to transform the world, and you will be like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the whole world will be turned into a paradise, and you can live a long life and have children and never see death, because eventually, if you are faithful, God will transform you into a spirit being. So you are the most privileged generation in the history of humankind that had this possibility, and you should have this vision. The coming of Christ is not going to stop your dreams. It's going to open up dreams that you have never dreamed of, the wonderful things that God has in reserve for you, in happiness, in marriage, in raising children, without the devil, without any dangers, without any beast to be a threat. And you have living in a ranch, in a farm somewhere, you won't be able of snakes. You won't be you won't be afraid of snakes or any animals to hurt your children, and you can live a long life and then see your children's children for 1,000 years. How do you like that? So you have received so much, which I really encourage you to appreciate and love and cultivate a relationship with Jesus Christ and with God. This world is coming to an end, but it's not the end of your lives. It's the beginning for you of a wonderful life that you probably have never dreamed. To be married in this society when they are trying to corrupt your children, when internet is geared at corrupting the minds of kids, is not the best thing, although you can do it and God will help you to protect your family. But if you look forward, you will be living in the world tomorrow, and you probably never will see death. And you will raise your family in peace and in joy, and you will meet Christ personally at every feast. Oh, my friends, if you know what you have, please, I beg you. I came from outside when it was dark, and I came to know the truth, which is light, and you have it. You have it from your early childhood or probably all your life. Please be careful not to neglect the treasure that you have. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, my friends.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. I was looking at our notes of all the stuff we wanted to ask you, and I think you literally already covered everything.
Checked them all off.
You checked them all off. Thank you so much for coming by.
Well, I didn't give you a chance to ask me questions.
No, or you just covered it all. And I had forgotten that you were a forest ranger. I think that's fascinating. So, yeah. Oh boy,
in solitude.
In solitude.
Well,
wow.
God was there, and
that's right.
And it was a tremendous experience.
You weren't really alone that whole time.
Yeah, and yeah. I didn't know I was getting close to God because I was practicing what this professor taught me, who had been a prisoner of war. You know, he had his feet on the ground, that man, and I loved him, and I put to work what God, I think, he through that man gave me that wonderful understanding.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, even before God makes his calling obvious, he does use people in our lives to kind of prepare the soil and to fertilize it and to kind of get it ready.
Yes.
Well, thank you again so much, and I hope you have a wonderful Sabbath.
Well, you too, and I thank you for inviting me, and I feel very privileged to be able to talk to the youth. I love the youth. I'm not that young, but frankly, I feel like a very young man. And it was a pleasure to talk to the youth today. Smith and Robinson.